Hello and welcome to another episode of Fintech Focus TV with me, Toby. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Mike Laven from Currencycloud. How are you?
Very good. Good to see you.
Listen, wonderful to see you as well. Thanks so much for coming on the show. It is a great story and one that was introduced to me by a protege of yours, Mr. Oliver Blower, who spoke hugely highly. So I've been excited about this ever since I've heard the name, and we've had a couple of chats over the last week or so. But there's a great story here. We've got someone here who's raised over 140 million pounds worth of funding in their company. You joined Currencycloud back in 2011 to build into, and I quote this, the world's most trusted payment platform, and something which we're on the journey for straight away now. Prior to that, 6 years at the United Nations, 25 years at the helm of high growth fintechs. I'm in fintech royalty right now.
Well, I don't know. Let's just say I get the Survivor Award anyway.
Well, survival is definitely the mot du jour at the moment, and
Right.
it's interesting times we sit in. Let's before we go into, we're actually at the end of the day or approaching day one of lockdown 2 here in the UK at the moment. But before we get into that and how you guys have dealt with the whole pandemic so far, and I think some great stories that you've got into that, give us a little bit of background, if you would, about your story and Currencycloud and why it's going so well at the moment.
All right. So let me just briefly be about me, and then we'll focus on the company. So the company raised its first venture funding, Series A, in 2012, and I joined at that time, coming from Triana, which was a piece of FX infrastructure. So I understood the FX world quite well. And Triana was sold to large banks and helped them reconcile FX transactions on a global basis. It's where I met Oliver Blower, who you mentioned earlier. And so I had to go back in ancient history, back when dinosaurs ruled the earth. I did start my career working in disaster relief and development in the United Nations, and then had a both Silicon Valley and London career going back and forth in high-tech companies. And back when we actually took over a risk management company, when what we now call partnership, we called flogging things to banks. And at that point, we started selling to banks, and I became quite familiar with the financial world and liked the financial world. So I was part of fintech long before there was such a thing as fintech, when it was really dealing in the technology of finance, both on institutional and then consumer and retail. So I got a long background in doing that kind of stuff. So that's sort of me. Live in London, have family in the US. As you can tell, I'm an American, but I've lived here forever, and go back and forth between Boston and London, and now London, and previously London and the Bay Area in San Francisco. Currencycloud, there were some very good technical founders. I came in to raise the Series A, the early stage funding, which came from some very good London venture firms. Anthemis, who's a specialist, Notion, who is a SaaS specialist, and a firm used to be called Atlas, is now called Accomplice. They've been joined over time by Sapphire, SAP, by GV, Google, by Visa, by Bank Paribas, by a series of other firms. So we've raised quite a lot of money, sort of to get to where we are.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm fascinated by that, and obviously, you talk about a fairly stellar cast there of investors within it. What's caught the attention, and what's made it such an investable business?
So listen, so we are there are plenty of firms in the money transfer business, and they're good ones. People all know TransferWise or World Remit or Asimo, and those are very good firms. But what they do is they deal with consumers. In other words, whether it's a remittance firm or it's a small business payments firm or some mixture of it, they effectively sell their product to businesses or consumers. That's not what we do. We have always been an embedded finance company and have sold the product to other fintechs, banks, and increasingly other segments that could be in fintech, lend tech, wealth tech, insure tech, so that we are call it a B2B to C or a B2B to X company. And so our technology and our business model and our people and our approach has always been about how do we make other firms successful with ourselves as a piece of infrastructure in the background, rather than a public brand. So you might hear a lot about a bunch of other firms because they are providing their service, and in a good service to the public. But in our case, we're providing it to other people. So, for example, not all, but a lot of payments through Revolut go through us. Not all, but a lot of payments, cross-border payments through Starling go through us, through a whole series of customers, most of whom, a lot of the big ones are on our website. But the real distinction is that we're an enterprise B2B product, not a consumer product. And that's sort of has a very different mentality, how we approach the market and how we approach our customers as well. But we're always quite conscious that they're approaching their customers. And we're very, very careful to try and not ever compete with the people who use our product. We provide a product to them, they provide it to their customers. And that's really one of the strengths of the business model that approaches things in that way.
And that business model, where did that come from? Because look, I believe that it's the kingmaker at the moment. When you're seeing businesses that are fluttering from one expedient to the next at these sort of times, the businesses who've stayed ultra focused, to me, have been those who invariably have been the most successful. Is that something which you guys have seen, or has it been dexterity around it?
So my Silicon Valley training, as I did a number of deals with quite a famous Silicon Valley venture firm, Sequoia, who've been behind many, behind Google, behind lots of very big firms. And incredible I can't business, say that my deals ever went to that stage, but I dealt with the top people there, and they had one brutal message, which was to stay absolutely focused.
Yeah.
And then once you know what you're doing and you're bigger, then you can perhaps relax that a little bit. But the way to grow the company is stay focused. So we have stayed absolutely focused on our to consumer, business to business message, embedded in other people and keeping going. And it's been an enterprise product. And remember, so often you get jealous. These consumer companies are growing hundreds of percents, and we're going to grow at a smaller rate. And our economics look very different than that. But we've absolutely stayed focused on our model. And I think one of the things that's happened recently in the market is this concept of embedded finance, which is effectively that the financial stack, ourselves, payments, lending, whatever it is, will be embedded in all sorts of businesses going forward. And so that finance, just like mobility or cloud, will be one of those things that many, many companies have. Well, that's where we've always been. We've always been embedded. And one of our strengths is we've thought that out in great detail at the business model level. And that's massively impacted how we think about the technology. Yeah. So we've thought really deeply about how, if we're selling to people who provide that service to other people, how we provide that service to them as a technology. And that's really driven by this sort of vision of the marketplace. And the marketplace vision hasn't changed since we started the company. I mean, in 8 years, we've learned a lot, okay? And we understand, and the customers have changed a lot and things have moved along a lot. But that basic vision that we're not a consumer-oriented company, we're a business-oriented company has stayed exactly intact.
There's a real piece around that, isn't there? Because quite often, and I've said this numerous times on this show, we see technology people driving business or driving their ideas at business people. But I think that sort of customer first piece has been the absolute standout of businesses who've prospered through this sort of stage, and then having that tech that makes it far more valuable for the end user on the other side. And I think when you're looking at most of the investments from Sequoia in particular, and I had the great pleasure of meeting Sir Michael Moritz a few years ago. I thought was an incredible character with so many different stories to talk about within it. But their whole message has been about focus, specialization, and most importantly, solve a real business problem, put the customer at the center of your whole thinking behind that. And that seems to be something which you guys have grasped.
Yeah, it's always been our vision of how to relate to the customer that then drives the technology. The technology is quite special, but a lot of the things that we've had to do flow from what it means to be able to integrate into the stack of other companies. And so and when you talk about Currencycloud, you have to really talk about the integration of the business model vision, which is a vision of how we relate to the customer, and the technology, and they've got to be matched. And as we've always had relative to other money transfer firms, and those can be very good firms, I don't need to take anything away from them. They're providing a great service to end users and they do a really good job. That's not what we do. We do something very different. We provide it to other kinds of fintechs so that they can provide, or they can provide it to their customers. So it's a different vision. So the growth has been a little bit slower, but it's been absolutely consistent and we're continuing to do pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's an interesting part, because there's been growth all the way through this period for you, in a time where, going back again to Sequoia, and we'll move on from them in a minute. But going back to them, there was that email that went out very early to all of they got leaked, I think, that went out to all of their investments saying, ultra caution, cut back, tear out, manage costs, manage money, etc., etc., and it sort of drove a bit of fear, I think, into the market, particularly the investment market at that sort of stage. And look, you're someone who's if we talk through that sort of career, you'd have gone through dot-com bubbles, you'd have gone through the financial crisis, etc. But this is a very different sort of economic situation that we're dealing with at the moment. And you've taken that, and rather than sort of batten down the hatches, so to speak, the company's done well and grown through this sort of period at a time where it's the most disrupted, most diversified staff base that you'll have ever had to have dealt with at any sort of stage. Tell us about some of the lessons you've taken from that, and what was the inclination to continue to grow through it all.
So thank you for turning my gray hair into an advantage rather than a disadvantage. That isn't always the case when you sit. So listen, when the message that came not just from Sequoia but from many other people, when the pandemic first hit and we were concerned about what would happen to the economy, what would happen to our staff, what would happen to our people, and there was a lot of unknowns, we took that very seriously to start. And at that point, we made a forecast for our revenues for the year that was incredibly pessimistic. In other words, we took a worst case scenario. Then this is when nobody really knew anything. So we were very conservative. And like every other company in the UK, but I guess not just the UK, but all over, we went to work from home almost overnight. Almost overnight, everybody who was in the office went home. And at that point, we then had to figure that out, like everybody else, as we went along. But one of the things that we decided absolutely upfront when the work from home started, because remember, you're dealing with a couple of very big different issues. One is, how do we respond to what's happening to the economy? And secondly, how do we respond to our employees in running the company? What we decided almost right away is that we would move to remote first, that we wouldn't fight it, that working from home is how life is going to be, and it's going to be that forever, that the nature of our office would change, that how employees related to each other would change, and that all that would change, and that we would set about solving those problems permanently rather than temporarily. And that made a huge difference. So it meant that all of the creativity that we have inside the company, and we've got a lot of smart people and creative people, all that effort went into solving the problem of working effectively. And one of the things we do quite well is we push things down a lot. And I find there are chat rooms, they have drop-in rooms. There's a lot of stuff that's happening. We have tools that we've got. Individual departments are working together so that, and listen, it's not without strain and stress. We have a couple of policies that we implemented along the way. During the lockdown, we give everybody one mental health day per month, which seems to be a major benefit, people just to take time off. We implemented a no meetings Wednesday because we found people were burning out looking at their screen. So we just said no meetings on Wednesday so that you would have a day when, and parents particularly are like that. And then we also then over communicated. I started doing during lockdown when things were really insecure. Remember, because if you go back to where we were in April and May, we had even in the end of March, I can't remember when the first lockdown came in, you had no idea how it will last. You had no idea whether the economy would fall off, would be totally devastated. You just had, there was a total lack of information at that point. And what we then did is to communicate a lot. I did a weekly call with everyone on which we also using an electronic tool for questioning that allowed people to do anonymous questioning of me.
Okay.
And that means that people could ask me the things that they really cared about without being afraid of being singled out. Am I going to lose my job? Will the company go under? Are you furloughing people? All the stuff that individuals might be reluctant to ask and to follow up on if they had to stand up and do it. We allowed people to do that anonymously, and I think that made a big difference. It allowed,
and that was in real time as well.
Real time, me there, other executives as we needed them. It just allowed people. And I didn't have any better answers than anybody else had, right? But we had everything out. And in July, when things relaxed a little bit, we allowed people to come to the office. But of our 120 to 140 London-centric employees, no more than 5 show up on any day. Yeah. And of our 50 to 70 Cardiff-based employees, maybe 1 or 3 show up. So though we've made the office available to people, there isn't a lot of uptake. And I think it's because 1, working from home is effective. 2, I think people are still concerned about using public transport. The people who show up are the ones who can walk or bike to work or take a direct train into Liverpool station. So with the new lockdown, which just remember only got announced on the weekend and it hasn't yet been confirmed by Parliament, but we're assuming it will be similar to the last one, though with schools open. And I'll put out some kind of communication today to the company. Let me just say that on terms of working from home, we absolutely effectively transitioned the company to working from home. The business of the company goes seamlessly. We actually now are recruiting, though in the beginning of the lockdown, we were really scared and we constrained it. Now we're comfortable, and I'll talk about the business side where we are. And so we're actually trying to add employees right now. So we're recruiting plenty of people who have never come to an office and might not have met anybody physically before they joined the company.
So, I might never do.
And we would hope they would at some point, but so far they haven't. Starting in June, I think in April and May we were quite worried, but starting in June we started to see our business recover. That the companies who were going to do badly or had a problem had started to do badly. The companies who were doing well started to do well. We also took the point of view that when the pandemic or the economic crisis is over, that what will be important is that your customers are still there. And so rather than trying to squeeze out and maximize revenue, we worked with customers who had a problem. We made it easier, I wouldn't say we charge less, but we restructured pricing. We really thought about how do we make sure that we hold our customers, and especially the ones that do have a problem. Because remember, if you're in travel or entertainment or various sectors, certain parts of retail, then your business does have a legitimate problem, whereas other people who we dealt with didn't. And so we were very sensitive to that. There would be issues in the client base that would cause them to need some understanding from our part. So we made it easier to deal with us financially for people who were struggling. At the same time, we measure our volumes of the transactions that we get. All that started to recover in June, and we're actually back on track for what we expected for the year, or maybe we'll exceed it, though the hole that was put in the numbers for the end of March, April, May is real, but we're actually back to where we thought we would be.
That's brilliant.
On the second lockdown, which is, let's assume, starting Thursday, again, we will have to, I think, close the office in the way, only 5 people are going in, so it's not like a massive
not devastating.
Shock. It's not devastating. But I find in talking to people that I think people are tired. I think they've watched all the Netflix they can watch. We will
keep on bringing new stuff out, though, don't they?
They keep bringing new up, but you've had 7 months of mining the back catalog. How many times can I watch some of these things? I think that there's more stress. I think also people as opposed to the last lockdown, everyone I talk to now knows somebody who has the disease.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
Whereas in the first lockdown, that wasn't true. It seemed more remote. That's not to say that they've died or they've had serious illness, but everybody now knows somebody who's been affected. Those people with school-age children, especially the ones who have college-age children, their kids have brought it home, or it's there in the universities. So I think there's a different level of anxiety on a personal basis this time. I think work-wise things work well, and business-wise we will have to see if there's an impact. But business-wise, we think the shakeout has occurred, and we're fairly stable. But anybody who says they really understand totally, I think would be a fool. You know, we're going to have to continue to be careful.
Yeah, I think that's the caution is the interesting part. And as I said to you earlier on, that we've just had an hour and a half of planning and doomsday planning on it, because it's an interesting time that we're doing this, isn't it? It gives everyone the opportunity to push back a little bit, with it being the classic sort of, it's November, it's nearly the turn of the year, let's wait till 2021, etc., etc. And there's a danger around the timing of this this lockdown, with December being a short business month, about what people do and don't. But the overwhelming consensus that we've been getting from talking to leaders every day across the world has been that this feels a little bit different as a second lockdown from a business perspective. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it does. But let me just say, we constrained our business so much in the beginning of the year that in terms of, and our growth has come back, and and as we see where that growth comes from, we think it'll sustain next year. I'm not sure of the exact number, but I know that we still have been trying in the fourth quarter, from October to the end of the year, trying to hire 30 or 40 people. So it's not a question of, for our business anyway, and we're quite fortunate in that. I know when I talk to my other venture firms, they have plenty of firms who are not in the position that we are. Our business is growing. We're having to do some of the catch-up hiring that we should have done earlier in the year, which we didn't do. And we need to do that. We need to provide the level of service, the product that we need, and be consistent with the growth in the UK and Europe and North America and in the rest of the world. We need to add people. And so we're hiring. And as I said, those people often don't interview in person. They don't meet people in person. We've actually effectively figured out how to onboard people when their whole experience is remote. And all that stuff we've had to figure out as we've gone through the year. So and we know that's fortunate. Not all businesses are in that position.
It's a really interesting piece, isn't it? And as I say, look, we're a by trade a recruitment business, and if you told me in March that none of your customers would be back in this year, or the majority of your customers wouldn't be back in this year, we'd have had real concern about how people would grow. But some of the stories of growth have been extraordinary. As you say, look, not everyone's doing it, but there's a huge amount of companies who've seen that opportunity, and the access to talent has been never a better time really to hire and grow a team if you've got the backing and the business flow to be able to do that. And the ability to remotely onboard has been has really shocked me. I would say in 20 years of doing the job, I would not have said that companies would be in a position to be able to take on and remotely onboard people as well as they have done. It's been fascinating to see. It's been real education.
So as I talk to other CEOs, which I do, I think if we're on the personnel side of it, a couple of the differentiators between the ones who are successful and the ones who are not are one, that we decided right away this was permanent. So instead of fighting it, we went with it. Secondly, we approached everything with the presumption of trusting our employees.
Yeah.
That we trusted that they're not coming into the office, they're not seeing their manager, we're not seeing them physically, but we trusted that they're going to do their jobs. And I think that trust has been repaid with people working quite effectively on a remote basis.
Yeah.
And thirdly, are pushing a lot of this down to trying to give managers the tools to work with and letting them figure it out for their groups. Different groups have different requirements. Some of the technical groups, the problem you get is people working too much by themselves.
Yeah.
And being isolated. They have a different set of problems. Some of the other groups where people really need to be close together all the time. They need to share information. They have to have a very different structure and organization than the groups that can work, slightly more in isolation. And so we've tried to let the groups optimize for themselves, and then over communicate, just over communicate.
Yeah. Do you know what? This is fascinating, because it is almost, and in fact, I'm going to turn my book back here, because it's. I spoke to John Noble, who's the COO at IG Group, recently, and he gave me similar, another company that's done really well through this pandemic, and I've got it written down here from that thing. Some of the things he spoke about: clear, concise decision making, make a decision and stick to it, over communicate, and allow talent the space it needs to perform. And I said to him at that stage, where I just finished Reed Hastings and Erin Meyer's new book about No Rules, which is the Netflix playbook, effectively, to culture and performance. And it is, again, that there are chapters dedicated to exactly what you've just spoken about within there. And I think this is about common sense leadership at disruptive times. That go with it, trust your employees, give managers the tools, and let them figure it out, and over communicate. These are things here which are absolute pearls, which seem to be common traits now with the highest performing companies that I'm talking to at the moment, that facilitates that growth. And I think that's a real pearl that we can take out and take into or everyone can take into this next sort of phase to maximize their performance over the next month or so.
Yeah, one of the things that we had assumed falsely before was that because people came to the office, that meant that they were committed.
Yeah.
and what we now know, and I guess we knew then, but we didn't, but was below the surface, that what manages is the culture of the company, its mission and its values. And if you communicate that creates the community, and the community isn't created by people coming in every day.
Yeah.
And so we've done a lot of focus on values, on mission, on culture. And the stuff's not easy, and I'm sure we keep doing it better and better, but we focused a lot on that, and that's what creates the community of the company, not that you physically show up every day. And so there's been, I think that was one of the learnings as well, that it's not that those things were unimportant before, but we've just made them more important than they were before, and that's made a big difference.
So as we said, look, there's 25 years now of Silicon Valley, of high growth, tech and fintech businesses, where it's probably been an area where we've seen more remote work over the last decade in particular. But before that wasn't something which was wholly embraced by the business until this sort of phase, and you see it moving further forward. I mean, look, I think the term that was used was remote first, was something which you put in place quite early in this, as you were saying. Has that been a pleasant surprise? Has that been something which you think would have been the case?
Yeah. So listen, having been involved in a whole series of different levels of technology and business organization, certainly when I started, the technology wasn't there and the mentality wasn't there. Remember, we're enabled to do remote first because everybody's connected by high-speed internet with telephones, with a series of things. Before you had that, you couldn't do that. You could only talk to people. I remember, I will show how gray-haired I am. In the first company I worked in, I remembered when voicemail came in. But when you think about it, it used to be that before, someone would get on a plane, you could leave them a message, they get off the plane, they collect their voicemail and call you back. Before that, all work had to be synchronous. Then suddenly voicemail came in, and with email, and suddenly you can work asynchronously. And when everybody had to come to the office and see each other, all work was synchronous work. Now we have all these tools that keep getting better and better to allow us to work asynchronously. So though we do have we do talk about getting together and cooperation tools, the big change is not those tools. We could do that in the office. The big change is how you can work asynchronously. You can talk to, just like this. You're not, we're going to then put it on and people look at it at different times. No, listen, people pick up their commute time, and given a place like London, where if you're young, and you live with 4 roommates, you may not live in the best of circumstances, or you live at home with your family, you don't want to be there. If you're a young family, given the price of housing, you have to have an hour and a half or 2 hour commute. So all of those living circumstances, people were happy to give up their commutes, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I think when it started, you had the worry of people burning out because they took their hour and a half and they started giving it for work, and they would work all day long. That wasn't good either. And one of the things we did is encourage people to take time off so that their mental health could be good. But yeah, listen, we decided right along that remote first was the way to go, that everybody liked it. And we've reconfigured our offices as well. Our offices will now become collaborative workspaces.
Okay.
So that when people do want to meet, and they do need to meet, let's be serious. Certain groups need to meet, and some will need to meet weekly, some will need to meet monthly, some will need to meet on an ad hoc basis. But they need a space where they can come in and feel safe and work. So effectively, our office in Cardiff and London and New York will all be reconfigured to be collaborate, more places to work together, fewer workstation-like places. Workstation-like work you can do from home, collaborative work in person you can do from the office.
Mm. It's fascinating, that, isn't it? And it shows the sort of level of thinking and thought that's gone into this. You mentioned there the sort of Cardiff office, who've been in lockdown a little bit before, so you've got the sort of the beauty of a little bit of foresight into what happens, and you've spoken to me before about some of the changes in that. Now, business wise, it doesn't seem to have made a huge amount of difference, and I know we're still very early into this lockdown. But tell us a little bit about what you're talking on a personal basis and how you guys are helping with that, helping your team with that.
Yeah. So again, I think I mentioned earlier that we've always had, so as part of our configuration during lockdown and during the transition, we've had a wellness master inside the company. We organized.
And is that someone who you brought in, or is that someone who's developed into that sort of position?
We brought them in. We also have a mental health person who actually works for the company. So we provided those kinds of services for people, and some use them. And but we've basically been quite sensitive to people who are struggling at home. Now, listen, we made the office open for people who really didn't want to work from home, and no more than 10 people have ever come into an office that can hold 120 to 150. But the 10 people who've come, and we're going to have to stop that for the next month. So we totally assume that when the lockdown rules go in, the new rules go in, that we will shut down completely. Again, we haven't seen the final rules yet, but our assumption is that, in which case we will, again, counsel people as we need to, help them out to the extent that we can. We went through in the early phase, we also had to make sure that people were set up. Remember, the people who were in the company when the first lockdown started had joined a company where their expectation was to come to the office. So they didn't necessarily have an adequate setup at home, a keyboard, a screen, a lamp, a desk, a chair. We didn't provide air conditioning, or we couldn't provide a new flat, but we could certainly provide the things around it. So we came up with a policy where we could allow people with a lot of flexibility, because everybody needs something different. One person needs a chair, another person needs a lamp. We just couldn't get into the great details, but so we provided allowance to everybody so that they could convert where they are to their home office, because that's where they're going to have to work. And now the people who come into the company are joining on the expectation that it will be a remote first company, and their time in the office will be not zero, but will be limited. So I think the big conversion was for all those employees who were hired before the first lockdown. Now everybody's expectation is that that we're a work from home company, and you'll have to sort of adjust that going forward. And I suspect there's some people who look at that and say, no, I want to come to the office every day. That's not the place for me. But increasingly we find that doesn't matter, that the universe of people who we talk to seems to be fairly large. Also, as we're hiring into this, and hiring reasonably, both some entry-level jobs and some more experienced jobs, we're certainly seeing plenty of people to talk to.
I was going to say, because there's the great work from home thing has always been a sort of selling point for a company. yeah, and over the last sort of 5 years, those companies have said, right, there's home working has been, particularly to developers, a big draw for them. It's leveled the playing field now, obviously, but I do wonder that other side there of people who are there are a number of people who crave the office, who crave that camaraderie and that sort of ability to do it. That people don't go from one side of the argument straight to the other. Do you feel that it runs the risk of losing out on talent, or?
Listen, people, there are the community of the office, especially with an employee base that's 28 to 32 years old, is incredibly important. As going out to the pub is important, and going out to lunch is important, and that community of people is important. And certainly, when the office is no longer there as a focal point, some of that gets missed. And I certainly do think that once we get through this stage and we get to the stage, our expectation is that sometime next year, we're never going back to 120 to 150 people in our London facility. So ever. But we think we'll average, whatever it is, 30 or 40 people, and some of those things will come together. So I think that community is important, and I think people miss that community and they want it to come back. It's just not going to come back for everybody every day.
In the same way, yeah.
In the same way.
So what happens to the office space then? Does that just stay a sort of, and how do you make that change? As you say, you were talking it to a more collaborative areas as opposed to sort of desk pods, etc., etc. Is it a completely different shape? Have you got large redundant areas now? Or?
So as our chief people officer says from a company that she used to work for, is if you compute, don't commute. So if what you're doing is coming to the office to stare, say, at the screen, that's not the function of the office anymore. So we actually are reconfiguring both London, and the Cardiff is a new build, so that there are more larger tables in wider open spaces, that there are fewer places to stare straight ahead and look at your screen. There certainly will be some, that we don't need massively more square footage than we had to accommodate more employees. So the office actually does have to be physically reconfigured. In the current stage, there's social distancing to take into account. But we think that we can get 30 or 40 people in the space that was configured for 120 to 150. Right now, we're doing much less than that. So very few workstations, lots of collaborative spaces, lots of places. The meeting rooms that we have, we will reconfigure them so that they're slightly larger, so that you can have, if the meeting room was for 8, it'll be for 4. So really thinking through the office as a collaborative workspace, sort of the WeWork concept, but that's what we'll deliver. And people who have focused work that need to sit and look like this, that you can do from home, but you'll come to the office for collaboration and for cross-functioning. I mean, plenty of companies have had, red team, blue team, this week, that week, and we haven't got to that stage thinking about that yet, because quite frankly, we don't have a need to have that many people come in yet. But when we do, we'll have to think of things like that as well. Yeah.
Well, look, I could listen to this for Oliver was right. This is an education, and as part of my ongoing MBA, I thoroughly enjoyed talking
right.
to you, and I think I could be sat here for many more hours listening and soaking all this in. I've got so many more things to run through and ask you, so I'd love to do that at various different stages. But I want to finish just by talking about Currencycloud, because I think there's so much, specifically the business side of it, because I think there's some amazing things there that obviously show why it's performed so well over the last area. But I want to focus on that sort of catchphrase of the world's most trusted payment platform. It's a big call there. It's a big mission. You spoke about mission beforehand and values and everything behind that. So tell us a little bit about how you're getting on with that, and what's exciting for Currencycloud in the next couple of months.
So I think, as I mentioned, that we will end the year, and we're pretty close to the end right now, with around 500 customers, and sitting behind them over 1 million individuals and businesses who access the system via those 500 customers. So the service that we provide, and those 500 customers use the service regularly, if not daily. So though the million customers behind might not be daily users, but our 500 customers are daily users. So our stuff has to work and it has to be effective. And remember, in the world of payments is a world where there's compliance issues, that you're processing millions of payments, even at tiny failure rates. You're getting a lot of things that have to be followed up. So what's very, very important is that the clients that we have, because it affects their business and their relationship with their client. So it's not that if my stuff doesn't work, I can't send $100 to my mom. It's if my stuff doesn't work, a company that's dependent on thousands of their customers being happy can't work. So the impact of it not being successful is magnified because of the business model we have. And so the resiliency that we've had to build into what we're doing is incredibly important. So that's been going pretty well. And we got new customers coming in, good marks from our existing customers who we're measuring all the time, and how they're thinking about us. And the impact of that is after the sort of shortfall in April, May, when I guess people didn't know how life was going to be configured at all, we're growing consistently, and we see that continuing in the course of the next years, with a whole series of different segments starting to be important. Previously, our customers were very much around neobanks, challenger banks, large banks themselves who are building new platforms, a lot of remittance companies and brokers. We're starting to see lend tech businesses looking at how they're configured cross-border. We're starting to see wealth tech businesses looking at how they're doing cross-border. We're starting to see our business of collections, in other words, not just making payments, but receiving on the part of your clients, growing phenomenally. So we've done a whole series of things in terms of expanding the product line and addressing other customers that hold well for the future. I think it does all come back to a couple of different things, though. It does come back to that we've always been an embedded finance company who work on a B2B to C or B2B to B, B2B to X, we call it, marketplace, enabling our customers to be successful. That model hasn't changed, but as the world of embedded finance and open banking gets larger and larger, the requirement for that kind of approach seems to be getting greater, and we're in the right place at the right time.
Brilliant, fantastic. Well, look, it's an episode I'm already looking forward to playing back and watching. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I thoroughly enjoyed every minute of it. And I've been hanging on the words, and there's some great stuff that I can't wait to actually sort of look at embedding into our business straight away as well. So I thank you for that, and I thank you for being so generous with your time and advice. And I'm sure people are going to be watching this and hearing and great things. So be it people wanting to join that sort of growth story, or be it people who want to find out a little bit more about Currencycloud, what's the best way of them getting in touch with you?
Us through the company's website. Come on there. I'm on there, and people all over the world find me at mlaven@currencycloud.com. I get things all the time. If I can deal with them, I do. If not, I pass them on to other people.
It's a good team around you to be able to do that. So long may it continue. Well, listen, please do get in touch with Mike. Mike, thanks so much for coming on the show and for all your time today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
No problem at all. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you soon on another episode of Fintech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.